Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I am your host, John Stancorb. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by none other than RJ Ronquillo. RJ is a versatile and powerhouse Nashville session guitarist, touring musician, educator, and YouTuber. His career spans a jaw-dropping array of styles and influences, and RJ's guitar skills have taken him from recording and performing with icons like Ricky Martin, Santana, Tupac Shakur, Stone Sour, Stevie Wonder, and Thompson Square. RJ has one of the most popular YouTube channels for guitarists around the world. His channel is a go-to for gear demos, in-depth lessons, and exclusive behind-the-scenes tour vlogs. Whether he's in the studio, on stage, or on screen, RJ's talent and passion for the guitar are simply unmatched. So let's dive into RJ's story, his journey through the industry, and maybe get a little insight into what's next. And now, let's hang with RJ Ronquillo.
It's so fun when you get to talk to folks that you followed for a while, or maybe in the case of like a Steve Lukather or a Dean Parks or whomever it might be, the fact that you get to sit down with somebody that you admire. Yeah. And I discovered your channel a while back, but I think at the time I was actually living in Dallas, and I had a teaching school down in Grapevine, and I was playing in a country band, and I was aware of Thompson Square, and I saw you at an outdoor show.
Oh, wow.
Somewhere in Dallas, but where it was, I can't remember. But I didn't get a chance to say hi or anything. But yeah, I do remember. This is probably going back great. Like 16 or 17, maybe 2016 or 17.
Yeah, I played with them from 2014 to 2018. I think was my last year.
Yeah, yeah. I joined I tour with a Pink Floyd tribute group, but at the time we had a little bit of downtime, so I joined this country band, which I always think that if you're gonna try to do something that's outside of your reach, that's a little bit beyond, to just throw yourself into something where you kind of have to immerse yourself in the music and try to assimilate and be the worst person on stage. You know, try to surround yourself with great players and that sort of thing.
That's how I learned. I mean, Thompson Square was really my first foray into the pop country Nashville scene. So I was totally new when I joined the band, and that's how I kind of learned and dialed myself into the whole Nashville scene. And you know, I'm forever grateful for that gig too.
Yeah, it's interesting when you hear somebody's story. They can be a world apart and maybe even a bit different in age, but you go, man, there's so many things that we have in common. The Marty McFly thing, like the Back to the Future thing, the Ibanez Sabre guitar being one of my first like really legit guitars, that paired with a Dean Markley amp. I thought, man, and just endless hours of trying to play Surfing with the Alien. This is like 1988. But then going right around that time, going to see Frank and Bali with the Chick Corea Electric Band, and just wow. Mind completely blown.
Yeah, I really do feel that period, you know, between, let's say, like 1984 to 90 was such a golden age for guitar in general. Yeah. You know, there's so much happening as far as, you know, guitars being sold and people picking up the guitar, and not just because of our age group or whatever, but I just feel like, you know, the way the pop culture was going at the time, and with MTV and radio and music and everything, I think it was just like one of the you know, the golden age of learning how to play guitar, I guess.
Yeah, and I started late, so right around that time. I'm 19, and I'm going to guess you're probably 9. I'm 59 now.
Yeah, I'll be 48 this year. So yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so that kind of lines up pretty well. But at that time, starting late, and I thought, I don't know what the hell compelled me at 19 or 20 to think, I'm going to pick this thing up. I've never played before. None of my family or friends play, but I think I want to make a career out of it. I wouldn't advise. In fact, I've had and parents of students that get that, especially parents that get that look in their eyes, like, my son or daughter's getting really good, and they're wanting to get serious with this, and they're scared shitless. They're like, oh my God, now my kid wants to, thanks a lot. You've encouraged them so much that now that they want to make a career out of this. So was that something that for you that was that seemed like that had to be on your radar when you're still in your single digits, as far as this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life?
Well, that's actually a good question. When I was younger, I really don't think I knew what I wanted to do with my life until I was in college, really. I was kind of one of those people that didn't really have I had a loose plan that I wanted to do music, ever since I was young, but there was also, and it could have been just like my upbringing and the culture of being in, having Filipino parents and everything, but there was always the voice in the back of my head, or my parents were saying that always have something to fall back on,
Right.
especially if you're going into music or the arts or something. So even like going through high school, I wasn't really uh, totally set on being a musician. Partly because I'm like, oh yeah, I know my parents, they probably want me to go to med school or law school, so I'll probably end up doing that and blah blah blah. But once I had a taste of college for 1 year, and I'm like, you know what? Let me just go for it. Let me just go into music and start studying music. And like, whatever my parents say, they were very supportive. But I just kind of dove right into it head first, and took it from there. Whatever happened, happened.
Yeah. And there along the way, there's players that I'm sure that were kind of like touchstones that kind of got you from one thing to the next and kind of helped build the fire or the fervor for playing. So I would guess that like all of us, if it's in the 80s, it's going to be, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Edward Van Halen, maybe uh, uh, George Lynch from Doc, and those kind of players
Mm-hmm.
that were all on the cover of the magazines that were out.
Yeah, they weren't my first touchstones. They weren't my first idols. So because of Back to the Future, I guess Chuck Berry would have been my first,
Yeah.
or Marty McFly, Chuck Berry, that whole thing.
Yeah.
So I got into guitar playing with 50s rock and roll,
Oh yeah.
Beach Boys. Not so much rockabilly, which is interesting because I like rockabilly now, but back then it was like a lot of basic Chuck Berry. I think like Beach Boys, and then like 60s music. And then it wasn't until it's funny, my sister's 2 years older than me, and she got more into newer bands and music. So she kind of, handed down what was cool to her back then. So she started getting into like Def Leppard and Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
So I in turn got into that. And then I'm like, okay, there's cool guitar playing in this. What else is there? And then around that time is when MTV started doing more of the hair band metal stuff. So Guns N' Roses started coming out, and you had all then Poison, all that stuff. So it was kind of a mess around that time. I know I had discovered Van Halen probably first through like their 1984 album. So from there, once I started getting into guitar playing and Eddie, then I went backwards and started with 1 and 2 and We're Down and all that stuff. And at the same time, then it was Van Hagar. So there's two periods of Van Halen that I'm juggling at the same time and getting into. So which was interesting, that duality of like having Van Hagar on the radio, but then having like Van Halen 1 in my Walkman and being like, this is kind of different. This is kind of cooler.
Yeah.
It's a little bit rougher, not as radio friendly or whatever. So, and then of course, like you said, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, I was huge fans of both of them.
Yeah, the magical summer of '86, I had in my car a cassette player, and I think on one side I had Eat 'Em and Smile, and the other side I had 5150, and I was going back and forth, and it was refreshing because I was such a Edward fan, and I knew of Steve Vai. But when that album came out, I was just like, it was like shades of Van Halen, but with a wackiness and a sense of humor and just some crazy stuff that it seemed like it had taken it to a slightly different level. Maybe not a greater, but in some way it had some bigger impact because I was hearing tonalities that I wasn't, especially when I heard flexible and things like that. I was like,
Yeah.
but yeah, so that was a very fertile period. It seems in some ways like and I had interviewed Corey Congilio and I asked him this question. I said, does it not seem like we're in like one of the greatest periods of guitar playing in some ways? And he said, well, he was kind of on the fence. He was kind of leaning a little bit more of, there's so much stuff out there. I'm paraphrasing, but in your opinion right now at the state of guitar, is it an exciting period of time or somewhat overwhelming with all the things that are out there on social media and such?
Yeah, it's exciting in terms of how mainstream it's become and how many people are getting into it and how great some of these young players are. And I do think a lot of guitar playing has become innovative and the gear, so that's exciting. As far as like, is it good? Um, that's a good question. I guess it's different. Obviously, I guess we'd be kind of biased because of the how we grew up and how we were able to learn things. I think it's different now,
Oh, wait, yeah.
and so and that could be a good thing or a bad thing, but um, I think it's easier for people to have access to free learning tools, whether it be websites or YouTube or TikTok or anything like that. So if I were a young person today learning how to play guitar, um, I think I would be really excited, and I wouldn't be able to imagine what it was like pre-internet to like learn guitar,
Yeah. I guess the question would be, would you be able to get out of your room and go to school with all the stuff that's out there? I was lost then, and this was pre-tablature days, pre-internet, pre-MTV. Well, actually, MTV was around when I got started, but there wasn't much. If you wanted to learn something, it was the half-speed deck of the cassette deck or slowing things down on vinyl. So what you did learn, even if you didn't learn it correctly, it was of benefit because you were using your ears.
Yeah, I think that's important too. Because nowadays, if someone's just learning from tab or learning from a video, they aren't exercising their ear, and which is I think a super important part of being a musician, to having a good ear. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think are important to being a musician that today's technology and social media doesn't lend itself to, like just being able to play music with other people.
Right.
When you see young kids that are learning great technique and shredding and everything, but they're just kind of stuck in their bedroom and making videos and everything, I think they're missing like 50% of what playing music is all about,
Right.
which is
Right.
and it's not even it doesn't even have to be about joining a band or anything, or getting gigs, but it's just the fact of playing with a real drummer or playing with another guitar player, what have you. I think there's a ton of stuff to be learned from that experience.
Yeah, because I mean, everything that you're learning in your room really comes to fruition when you're playing with other things that you don't have together necessarily. You'll find out very quickly, and sometimes a not the terribly hostile environment, and sometimes it might be a slightly hostile environment if it's a gig and you're doing a sub gig or something and you're not quite cutting it. You find out very quickly playing with your brethren, how am I
Mhm.
doing? in terms of
Yeah.
is
And that's also about, that also goes to exercising your ear. That's part of it. Ear training and learning songs is exercising your ear, but also listening to other musicians while you're playing is exercising your ear.
was that were you like me in the sense of just sitting down and even in the most basic way trying to notate things, either in tab or just finding a way to write down what it is that you're hearing so you could go back and actually play it? Were you writing tab out when you were in the early days?
So I started coming up right when tablature in the magazines and tab books were coming out. So I relied on the tab to learn the notes and to have an idea of where on the neck they were played. But I had to, the way that I learned songs or licks or stuff, like I had to listen to the record with the tab at the same time over and over again. So it wasn't like, oh, I've heard this song a couple of times, let me look at the tab and I'll learn it that way. It was more like the tab was a map for me to follow.
Right.
So I kind of did a hybrid approach of learning stuff, but I didn't really start writing out stuff on my own until I was in college, and I kind of was required to for jazz school.
Yeah.
To transcribe, jazz solos and everything. So it wasn't until then when I started actually tapping stuff out. But it's funny how much I relied on tablature when I was learning how to play guitar, to the point where, like, I remember getting to school and I didn't know how to, like, I knew how to read music because I learned how to play piano before playing guitar, so I knew the notes on the staff and everything, but I never was good at translating that to guitar. And I remember one of the first pieces that, like, a teacher gave me, I think I took it back home and I took the sheet music and I tabbed it out and then memorized it,
Right.
so I could get through the piece or whatever. So that's how much I relied on tab, and eventually I learned how to sight read, and get fairly good at it, even though that's a skill that I never need to use these days.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, if you're not using it, it quickly atrophies,
Yeah.
But but just to understand, having something to draw from, at least having read for guitar, that if you had to do it, it's something that you could cultivate again. And I don't think that that's there's just not a lot of, for a lot of rock guys, there's not a lot of, you don't get called into that thing where you're going to be asked to, to read something. So
Yeah.
if although if you decide, if you're going to school and you're trying to get a gig in the pit orchestra or something, or a theater gig or something like that, that's about the only time that I can think of that you're going to ever run into that, because there's no, even with session work, you're not looking at that.
Yeah. Unless you're doing work for film
or something like that,
where everyone's reading something. But yeah, you're right. Unless you're, doing like a big band show gig or Broadway or like some sort of, Cirque du Soleil thing.
Yeah.
That's the only time I've ever needed to actually read notes,
Right.
Notation.
I was fascinated to see some of the folks that you've played with, and the idea of being a touring musician and now, doing studio work and doing your YouTube channel and all the other projects that you have going. Is it a refreshing thing for you to be off the road? Because it's very hard for the average person to realize the toll that it takes on you being on the road, and just it can wear you down mentally, spiritually, physically. There's some great perks to it, but it's a really tough way to live a life. I'd be interested to hear how your transition from touring with Ricky Martin and Thompson Square and.
Yeah, I think my my touring career that I had previously was great, and it occurred during an age period where I was capable of
Right.
sustaining that, and it was a lot of fun. And eventually, I so in 2018 was kind of the last year that I agreed to take any touring work, and 2019 was kind of my first year as a full time YouTuber content creator. But getting off the road, it was a gradual thing because I think I had the idea of quitting touring probably 2016, 2017. So it took me a year and a half to really have the courage to do it. Um, but once I did it, and 2019 was just like an awesome year for me. And once I did it, I don't miss touring. What I do miss is playing music live and the camaraderie, playing with friends.
Right.
But the what really kind of took me out of it was the traveling, and not just being away from home, but the 4 a.m. lobby calls,
Oh, yeah.
flying every day and having to do a show that night and flying, another. So there was a time actually where I was so like I had adrenal fatigue. Like it was taking a toll physically, medically, I guess, where the exhaustion and like the lack of rest was just affecting me physically. So I'm like, you know what, this is, I would rather be healthy and stay
Yeah.
home and
Right.
do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that being said, I'm still open to touring nowadays if the right gig comes through
Right.
and the right schedule comes through. But right now I've been comfortable doing what I do. So it's been great.
Yeah. The anything that's going to lead you down into a thing of becoming ill or just feeling like that it's so taxing that athletes travel all the time to go and to do games and that sort of thing, but they're keeping up their athleticism. With musicians, it's so hard to be on the road doing this kind of stuff and keep on top of getting better at what your occupation, your craft, because there's so
Mhm.
much time involved. It's really hard to get checked into a hotel late, knowing that you have an early lobby call, and then find time to practice or to be listening to things. It's a really hard thing to keep developing as a musician. If you're
Yeah, I mean, I never practiced on the road. In fact, unless I was at soundcheck or doing the show, I don't think I ever played guitar because it
right,
was kind of the last thing I wanted to do was play guitar
right,
after, playing how many hours a night. So I took advantage of the time off and the hours where I wasn't playing guitar, whether it was, I would try to exercise, go to the gym or explore cities and stuff like that. So I never, I was, I don't even know how I made it through college. College. I was probably the one student that practiced the least.
yeah,
And kind of, I mean, I practiced, but compared to like my classmates that would just like practice until like 3 in the morning,
right,
just shedding stuff. I was more into, just practicing enough to get through get good grades and make it through college. And then just, not that I partied, but I was more about the social aspect of school. But I'm notorious for not being the guy that practices a lot.
yeah. Well, it seems like what you're doing with the YouTube channel is leading you down very interesting avenues with different guitars, different gear, playing different types of things. When I hear you play, you don't fall neatly into a category of like a bunch of other players. You have a very unique, interesting voice. I mean, I hear elements of a lot of different players, but it seems like you would kind of be the quintessential person to be a Nashville studio guy in as much as you seem to be able to shift into different areas, whether it's a Hendrix thing or something like you do with RJ and the
Del Guapos.
yeah, the Del Guap, which absolutely fantastic, by the way. That's great
Thank
stuff.
you.
But that's you've tapped into something where it seems like you've not only in your content of who you are as a content creator, but as a guitar, you found your own voice and you have a uniqueness to yourself. And I think that's maybe one of the singular most difficult things to do in the YouTube arena is to find your lane and to find your comfort in your own skin doing your thing and have it stand out in some way.
Yeah.
It seems like beautifully. So
thank you. I think when probably like right before I moved to Nashville, while I was still living in LA, I was trying to figure out what kind of guitar player I am, or what kind of guitar player did I want to be, or which avenue did I want to go down as far as like, am I a rock player? Am I a blues player? What am I doing? And I'm just like, screw it. Let me just play what I enjoy playing. And the diversity of styles that I play is because I genuinely love listening to the music, right. Whether it be, rockabilly, surf music, or jazz or heavy metal, or, stuff like that. So I don't know if it's in the DNA of Filipino people, but whether you're a singer or a musician, Filipinos like to copy exactly, a person, whether it's a person's voice or, a person's playing style or what have you. I mean, that's that's been known for many years, that Filipino people can nail parts and stuff. So maybe it was, my goal to just, if I'm going to play like Hendrixy stuff, I really want to study it and get. The important thing is the feel and the stuff you can't really teach,
right?
Whether it's like the feel of Hendrix or the feel of reggae or something like that. And I really don't know. I think it just comes a lot from listening to stuff over and over again. Like I'll literally listen to the same Hendrix song for weeks and just kind of dissect every little thing that I'm hearing. And it just kind of eventually gets into your mind and your playing. But that's kind of how I treat learning different styles. I listen to stuff just out of pleasure,
right?
Whether it's like reggae music. When I lived in Miami, I joined a reggae band, and they were kind of like my first touring gig, a band called Inner Circle. And before I joined them, I loosely listened to reggae. I listened to Bob Marley and all that stuff in college. But when I joined their band, they started, showing me all this reggae stuff that I would have never discovered on my own. And I really got into it, and I started discovering other bands and artists on my own, and really listening to it and dissecting it and just enjoying it, to the point where I think I actually tried growing out dreadlocks at one point.
Yeah, that's a commitment.
Yeah, it's like what do they, when actors really
method actors like Daniel Day-Lewis?
Yeah, I was like a method musician, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I'm in a Pink Floyd tribute group, so I feel that the weight of what you're saying, because you kind of have to. Although with Pink Floyd, there's not a specific characters that you have to embody. It's the frame of mind. It's a very British reverential kind of thing, and it's all about the music and the mood, and it's less about flying V guitars and
yeah,
big, big hair and spandex, and it's a complete antithesis of all that kind of stuff. So
Sure.
I've been doing that for 15 years. So that method acting thing is that really rings true. Do you get a lot of inquiries about doing something like what you're doing with the YouTube channel? Is people reaching out to you and saying, "RJ, how do I do what you're doing?"
I did, especially at the start of COVID. So in 2020, when a lot of my musician friends were not on the road anymore, and they were like, "Well, let's try this YouTube thing." So I got tons and tons of messages about, how do I start? What do I need to buy? What camera gear and lighting and all this stuff. So now it's not so much. I think, there was a big rush of things in 2020 with everything, whether like YouTube gear, guitars obviously was like the biggest selling year, I guess. So now it's kind of evened itself out. But occasionally I'll have, and it's usually a friend or somebody I know that is interested in making videos and stuff. So um, a lot of it is, what camera gear to buy, what do I need lighting and stuff. And my tips are always make sure your audio is as good as you can get it. And whether it's, buying specific mics for talking or, lav mics or what have you, and recording your guitars, as if you were recording into
Right.
Pro Tools or Logic. I think that makes a big difference, especially in the framework that we're in as guitar players and musicians. I think having the audio is number one, and then number two is just buying, a cheap lighting kit,
Yeah.
because most everyone has a smartphone or an iPhone, and the cameras in these devices are great.
Right.
So as long as you light something good,
Right.
even if you have like a nice bay window or something,
Right.
that's as good as anything. But just, audio and lighting go a long way as far as making content, YouTube videos or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing is just trying to find out or trying to just organically come across as who you are without the idea of I want to quickly go from 200 followers to
Yeah.
2 million, like, because it's just yeah, there's no way to predict what it's going to become, but it can be, I would think it can be lucrative for those that scale up who they are organically over time.
Yeah.
It's
I
that.
think of like, I'm probably the worst person to ask about that type of stuff and the algorithm and stuff. There was a time when I first started where I was trying to learn about, okay, I need to title my videos this way, or I need to have a thumbnail that looks like this. But for me nowadays, maybe it's because I've gotten lazy or whatever, but I'm just like, I just want to make the videos and content that I enjoy making. And
Yeah.
I know that there are people that are going to watch it. That's the beauty of YouTube and social media, is that there's always going to be some sort of an audience for whatever you put out there. So you might as well just be yourself.
Right.
Don't try to do anything that you're not, because there's always there's always an audience for the craziest subjects. People are going to watch something crazy. So I wouldn't look into it that much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think that's the thing that's a bit scary is or it seems like it's the patience thing. And Gary Vaynerchuk always talks about, folks that are setting out to do anything, any new venture. It's just they don't have the patience to give it a couple of years and just being consistent over the course of time. It seems like that folks want to, especially with guitar students are that way. I guess people who are starting a diet are the same thing. They want something really fast with minimal effort, and Uh, the one thing I do find interesting is just the the new amount of gear that comes out every year. Um, it in some ways it's staggering. In some ways, it's like I can't believe that there's so many new cool twists on things like the Halo pedal by Robert Keeley, the and just things like that that I've tried that I thought, well, what it's yet again another delay pedal, and you get it and you go, holy shit, there is still cool things to be discovered with new gear. And especially when you hear folks like yourself demoing some of these new pieces, it's very inspirational. Do you find that does it factor into your writing new music, or at the very least writing pieces of music that will be original compositions used in your YouTube videos?
Yeah, it definitely can be. Every so often I come across a piece of gear that I demo that's, kind of blows me away, which it can be as simple as an overdrive pedal, and I demo overdrive pedals like almost weekly.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot for me to get excited about certain types of pedals just because it's like
Yeah.
it's hard to make something fresh.
Right.
So, but when something does, it's definitely inspiring. And there's a lot of pedals that I've demoed that are really wacky.
Yeah.
So, um, I think the challenge with that is learning how to use these pedals, and then I almost treat them like their own instrument. Certain
Right.
pedals that you play around with almost as if it was an instrument in itself. So those types of pedals are always inspiring to create and write stuff with, because it's like learning a new instrument almost.
Yeah. Do you have uh, an ongoing amount of manufacturers that are reaching out to you saying, hey, got this new product, would you be interested in it? Or do you have like somebody that kind of handles that for you and presents it to you, like any kind of management that kind of is like the gatekeeper for new stuff that's trying to find its way onto your channel?
I wish I had management or an assistant, but no, the companies directly contact me.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that I seek out a company
Right.
unless it's like something that that had already come out that I'm interested in demoing, for my own sake. But plenty of companies will email me, and it's been great because you know how I started was very simple with Eastwood guitars, and I
Yeah.
had, in fact, I reached out to them. That was like the initial thing, was me reaching out to them because I wanted to demo a guitar. So now, and I don't even think I charged money back then. So now from that, looking back at that into where I am now, where I have daily email work that I have to do because of the amount of, companies reaching out. It's just great. I'm totally thankful for it. I'm excited to be where I'm at. So, it's been an interesting ride.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you could usher the 9-year-old RJ into your studio now and just the look on his face, like, oh, this is all going to be mine, and then,
It's be careful what you wish for.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's everything and nothing you would expect as far as the music business part of it goes. Are you also the one man show in terms of putting together the video production part of it? I'm editing your own videos and doing all the lighting and stuff, because that's a
Yep. I
very,
do it. I do it all. I think there was a couple years ago, I tried to hire out just someone to edit videos, but I found that it was easier and faster if I did everything myself.
right. Yeah,
So
'cause you probably got a method now where it's probably in the long run, you're not saving that much time, and you're certainly saving money by not having somebody else.
yeah, Yeah, I haven't really dialed into where I can probably when it's just a regular gear demo, I think I can do like two or three in a day, like a
Mhm.
full day, from start to finish. But I just try to do a couple a week nowadays, just so I'm not too stressed out. Because I think there was a period, probably I don't know, somewhere between 2019 and 2021, where I was just hustling and trying to get as much work and saying yes to everything as much as possible. And I think I probably got burned out. So now I'm like, I can take it a little bit easier. I don't have to film every day. I can take some days off. So it's gotten to the point where I'm very comfortable where I'm at. And um yeah, I just the companies, it's really interesting to see what the companies put out. Even today, there was a pedal that I felt like everybody did a demo for, but I didn't get the email, which is
Yeah.
fine. I'm totally like I don't have that feel of fear of missing out when I see my colleagues demoing a pedal that didn't get to do, because there's other pedals that I'm demoing too. So I have a lot on my plate already. But it's interesting how the industry is works in conjunction with YouTubers now. I feel like, whereas when we grew up, it was all about advertising in the magazines and putting the piece of gear into some sort of celebrity's hands, and hopefully they'll play it on TV or in a video or something, right? And now it's almost like, if this young lady has a million followers on TikTok,
Right.
let's give her the gear, and she can show it off. And that's kind of, it's funny how how it, you never would have thought
Right.
when we were growing up that this would have been a possibility.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's also it's exciting because it's that free enterprise, kind of mentality of for those that want to do some really fun stuff and some great stuff. It's out there for you. You just have to kind of know what the playing field is. I don't think the average person would want to do something like what you're doing would have an idea of what even the median, how many followers that you would need to have to get into that line of work where people would start approaching you. I would guess a million followers or half a million followers. I don't even know where the
I think it doesn't even matter, like, if we come down to the amount of followers and subscribers. I think as long as the views are there,
right.
that's what's important. Obviously, someone that has a million followers or something is going to get a ton of views, but sometimes you'll be surprised that, like, I've seen YouTube channels with less than 20,000 subscribers, and they make really great videos that get 10, 20,000 views. And those are the channels that you can see that are just like shooting stars, that are just like getting more subscribers over time. And that's what's really cool to see, is new YouTubers just making really great videos. And it doesn't have to be gear demo videos, like whether they're doing lesson videos or just interesting content. I've seen so many uh, YouTubers that started out and obviously had almost no followers, and now they've eclipsed the amount of subscribers that I have, and it's so exciting to see that can happen. Like, I'm totally comfortable with my slower trajectory,
Mhm.
just that's slow and easy. That's fine with me. But I love seeing, like, oh my gosh, like my friend, this person who has like 500,000 subscribers. I remember them when they only had like 5,000.
Right.
Maybe 7 years ago or something like that. So
Yeah.
it's really cool to watch the growth.
Yeah. And obviously it's attributed to they're presenting something that people are interested in, but is it also just is it also a numbers game, just the volume with which that they're putting out content?
I think it is. I've noticed that they hustle a lot more,
Yeah.
whether it's not necessarily putting out content every day or anything, but I can tell that they spend a lot more time on their videos than me or some other YouTubers do. And I can, because that's kind of, I'm in the business as well. Like I can tell, like, oh, they spent time with this edit, or they spent like an extra day shooting this B-roll for this thing. Um, so that also is a big part of getting eyes on your video, is if you make it something visually
Right.
appealing. You know, it's some videos I've seen are like, movies.
Yeah.
Just like there's a feel to them like a movie does. I'm like, wow, that's like, expensive camera, expensive
All
lens.
right.
They're
Yeah. I
spending time, slow motion shots and everything like that.
think the first.
So that can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I
And
think the. Go
I know a lot of channels that uh, they might not be, the greatest guitar player, but they know how to make a video and tell a story and use a camera and everything. And some of those are the best YouTube channels.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Paul Davids was one of the first guys that I saw his videos, and I was like, my gosh, this can't be a one person thing. I mean, because you see him in different things, and it's like somebody had to be, you know, some sort of gimbal following him along, and then this case opens, and then he's pouring the thing into the coffee, and then there's all these edits and all these, and like the quality of this looks like something you'd see either on a Super Bowl commercial in terms of,
Mhm.
it just seems like how much money would you spend to make something like that? But at the end of the day, that's really what brings people to your channel is.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised. I mean, a lot of the videos that you're talking about are one person doing it all with mediocre equipment. I mean, we all kind of started with the basics of camera equipment and all that stuff, and learned, at least for me, learned how to use it and learned how to kind of make cinematic shots. Not that I do that that much, but um, there's lots of videos on YouTube that teach you how to make cinematic movies with your iPhone. So anything is possible these days.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. My wife showed me a way to turn the phone upside down in portrait mode to take a photo and what a difference it made. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, well, there's amazing things each and every day, I suppose, with technology. But is there something that's coming up for you that's particularly holds your excitement, or any projects or?
Let's see. I mean, I've got some gigs coming up. Um, I have like a country gig coming up in town, which I'm excited for. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it yet because it hasn't been
Announce it?
publicly announced. Yeah, the artist hasn't announced it. But I do have a side project. It's just like a passion project that I started with my friends. Probably we started in, during COVID time, just kind of recording stuff and sending files back and forth. But it's an AOR band called Transatlantic Radio,
Oh yeah,
and the music is, what we love about the 80s and early 90s kind of pop melodic rock stuff.
right.
So we are finishing up a record. We put out like 4 singles now, maybe 5 singles already, and we're trying to finish up a record. And we have 2 shows booked this summer
Oh,
in
nice.
Sweden, of all places.
That's awesome.
Kind of the home of melodic rock, I guess.
Wow, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that should be exciting. And that's just something, you know, I don't think we're super, super serious about it because pretty much everyone in the band has like their real work and their real gigs. So this is just more, like I said, a passion, fun project. And the fact that we're actually, you know, we made a video in Vegas a couple weeks ago. We got the record coming out, and you know, these shows. It's just fun,
Right.
fun stuff happening.
Yeah. Were you in charge of putting together the concept for the video that you shot, or was there somebody?
No, so the video that we shot was, I don't know who actually. Our bass player Victor Broden is kind of like our captain. So he arranged everything, and we got this really great photographer, videographer in Vegas, and we just shot the live performance shots, and then they're actually going in and actually doing, you know, a whole plot to the video, like with actors and stuff. So I don't even know, that's
Wow.
out of my hands, but I know it's going to be
Yeah.
pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, if there's
So
anybody,
hopefully that'll be out this summer.
yeah, that's exciting. If there's anybody that has their finger on the pulse of that the '80s guitar, the Dan Huff, or you know, the Lukather sound, you know, you really seem very in tune with that. You and Mason Marangella are really
Oh yeah.
very educated in that realm.
There is it's pretty exciting. There is a niche group of super fans around the world that are into this type of stuff, which you know, you would have never thought that, but it makes sense. You know, I think when Mason put out his Dan Huff interview, they they all came out of the woodwork like, "Oh, I love this stuff. I love Dan." And you know, there's a Dan Huff fan page on Facebook that I'm a part of, and um, '80s AOR fan groups and everything. So there is, you know, an audience for all of this stuff, and super fans, which is exciting. So it's like, you know, nerdy stuff, you know.
Right.
It's totally nerdy, like Star Trek, but for '80s studio guitar legends, I guess.
Yeah, it's like if there was ever a secret code word to get into this elite club, it would be Dino My Piano.
Yeah,
I
exactly. You
remember
know,
that
that is.
phrase from like a really old Guitar Player magazine, and it was Tom Bradshaw or Steve Lukather was talking about this tri-stereo chorus and this Dino My Piano and all this stuff. And you know, back then in the pre-internet, you you just say, okay, well that sounds cool. I have no idea what any of that stuff is.
Yeah.
But I was talking to a guy who's become uh, uh, more of a friend than an acquaintance. Is Michael Thompson, and he was telling me that whole era of moving gear from studio to studio and having cartage bring all
Mhm.
that stuff in was just you know, while it was super exciting in the beginning, it was getting to the point where he was like, man, I just want to hear my guitar tone, because it had gone so far away from what he had started out doing, you know, and then using all the processing stuff. But he said, now I still have all that, but he in his studio, he's got a mix of old school, new stuff, and he's able to, one, I guess, not so old stuff. You've got the vintage stuff, then you have that '80s thing, but he's able to traverse back and forth, kind of like and it's all on the pedal boards, like what you're doing with the Dan Huff rig.
Yeah, I think Michael's probably smart that he kept, you know, like his Eventide and all that stuff. I think it's making a comeback, or it has made a comeback, but um I think the fact that he kept that gear is probably going to be beneficial.
Right.
Because you know, I there's a story that somebody bought Dan Huff's old rack rig and put it back together and everything. So needless to say, Dan doesn't have those kind of iconic pieces that he used to record a lot of those hits with anymore, but somebody does. So, you know, the fact that Michael Thompson has the majority of his original gear from that period, I think is really, really cool. I wish I had that.
Yeah, I I just remember being a kid and being a big fan of Van Halen and those guys, but then hearing like the extended solo to "Running with the Night" by Steve Lukather, and I was like, man,
Mm.
some of that's it's like you really wanted to figure out a way to hear what that sounded like if it went a little further before the fade out. There's certain
Yeah.
songs you just go, man, he was really just starting to burn on that track. I really wish I could hear more of that.
I didn't discover Lukather until I got one of those Starlix
Yeah.
videos, compilation videos. So they had like clips of everyone that was on the roster at the time. And I remember Steve's part, he had that Cherry Sunburst, Valley Arts, EMGs, Gold Hardware, right? And then he was talking about his gear, and I just well, the sound that came out was so processed. It didn't even sound like guitar to me. There was so much, you know, grease as he called it, but just delay and chorus and reverb, and it was just like this huge sound. I'm like, oh, that's so weird. So my first, you know, sight of Steve Lukather was really him and his rig
Oh yeah.
and the sound that, you know, came out of it. So and at that time I probably wasn't into that or Toto. It wasn't until probably college where I started rediscovering all this stuff with like, you know, Luke and Michael Landau and all those guys where I really got an interest
Yeah.
in that type of stuff.
It's really interesting how we would be led down these rabbit holes by reading our favorite guitar players being interviewed in one of the magazines. And they would mention Larry Carlton, Robin Ford, Alan Holdsworth. And you start going down that, and before long, you're so immersed in that stuff. And for me, I didn't ever think I was going to be able to fully commit to playing like that, but for a long time, I just wanted to hear everything that Alan Holdsworth had done, or everything that uh, "Burning Water" by Michael Landau, or just any of these guys that were playing things that to my ear were outside sounding, things that just sounded outside of the pentatonic realm. I just wanted to hear more of that and see, and it was very exciting, but at the same time, very daunting to think, man, I don't know that I can ever get to that place of
Yeah.
playing like those guys.
Yeah, it was really fun to discover, like you said, guys like Alan Holdsworth around that time in the 80s or whatever, because there was mainstream guitar music and players that everyone listened to, and then there was kind of like the outliers, whether they were like Holdsworth or Michael Landau, the guys that you didn't hear much about unless you were like a hardcore guitar person,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So like the average Eddie Van Halen fan would probably have zero interest in Alan Holdsworth, even though Eddie was probably a massive Alan Holdsworth fan, you know?
Yeah. He produced the road games for him, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that there was like those two spaces of guitar music back then.
Yeah. It it seemed like back then there was definitely like you had certain, not unlike today, I suppose, but it seemed like there were certain camps. You were in the Van Halen, George Lynch, Jakey Lee thing, or you were into the Alan Holdsworth, fusion stuff.
Mhm.
Having said all that, and if anybody's listening to guitar stuff, that's an exciting, because there's so much stuff to enjoy, and you don't have to like it all. You don't have to. There's not enough time in the day to listen to it all anyway. But I'm more optimistic than anything. It seems like it's a very fertile time to be involved in guitar in any
Oh
capacity.
yeah. Yeah, I mean I try to keep track of all the great players and all the great bands that are coming out as far as like, you know, the neo soul guitarists to the progressive metal genty guitarists and all that stuff. jazz guitar, whatever is out there. So there's, like you said, it's so hard to keep up with, and it's very fertile, and there's a lot more than was coming out in the 80s, which is exciting, but also my fear is that it's going to be oversaturated, and players are going to just get lost
Yeah.
in the noise, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't, I can't conceive of what it will sound like for guitar players coming up now for Matteo Mancuso to be your bass line, where you have to be that good. Because our bass line was like, if you could play Eruption, or if you could play Mean Streets or Unchained or whatever, that was kind of like, yes, that's the bar. Or play YYZ by Rush or something like that. But now, young guy, if coming up, Matteo Mancuso's your guy, or Guthrie Govan, it's like,
Yeah.
how how much further can it go in terms of?
Yeah, what I'm interested in is seeing if there's somebody that's going to cop Mateo's style, his technique exactly, because that's like, well, if I want to play like him, I have to learn how to play with my fingers this way, and that's the only way to do. Which is, I mean, if you're really going to try to imitate him, you have to do everything, which is
Right.
that the right hand technique and everything. So it'll be interesting to see if people start playing like that, because I remember like when Derek Trucks
Oh
was
yeah.
young and he was coming out, and then like years later I started hearing people playing slide guitar exactly like Derek Trucks, and no one prior, I wouldn't say anyone prior to Derek Trucks had that style. There was great slide guitar players obviously before him, but I think Derek's slide style is like none other, and it's interesting to see kids that are learning how to play slide guitar, like that's the touchstone, and that's
Yeah.
all they know as far as slide guitar, like that's how it's supposed to be played, is the Derek Truck style.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to watch. Same thing with like Eric Johnson's style. I don't know if you remember um, like Joe Bonamassa, when he
Yeah.
was younger and he was coming up, he had a certain style. And then I remember specifically hearing, I think it was probably a live recording, where he threw in this Eric Johnson pentatonic lick. I'm like, oh, he's been studying like that Eric Johnson stuff. And
Yeah.
now he's kind of, implemented part of that, or at least to me, it sounds like he's implemented a lot of that into his playing a little bit. But I remember, you can hear it in his records where the pre Eric Johnson, not saying that he's copying him, but I can tell, like, he learned, he shedded that particular style of like fast pentatonic playing that I associate with Eric Johnson. And I remember hearing that in Joe's playing. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, because his earlier albums, that you didn't really hear that. And it's interesting to see how one's, especially an artist, a guitar player as big as Joe Bonamassa, to see how their style kind of developed,
Right.
during the career. A lot of times I guess you could say the same thing about Eddie Van Halen, but it's interesting to hear like someone like Clapton or someone where their playing changed,
Yeah.
from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I know some people get really hung up on the 60s era, and anything that came after Cream they don't want to know about. And then there's other folks that love that, like John Mayer's a huge fan of that Journeyman era Clapton.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting for those legacy players that have had all those different iterations of what they do. But yeah, at the end, it's just interesting that you keep going and trying to. It's inspiration to all of us to try to find new avenues and new things that excite us. So
Yeah, absolutely.
man, thank you so much for taking your time out of your vacation. That's awesome.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
I'm a huge fan. Thanks so much.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much, John.
All right, man. Have a great week.
You too. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the Guitar Hang Podcast, conversations with noteworthy guitar players from around the world. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to stay updated on our latest episodes.